Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week,
there's almost a compulsion to have to do it, and you can notice the negatives, but somehow you're still outweighing that and continuing to do it.
That's one of the definitions of addiction, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Doing something that you know is not good for you, but you can't stop doing it. And that kind of sounds what we're talking about here, right?
I think we have what are called behavioral addictions, which mean that these are behaviors that become very, very difficult to break, bringing about the same types of withdrawal that you might experience if you come off a chemical addiction.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday. The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. My name is Mick Coyle. We're back after the August bank holiday, September 2022. Here we are. Plenty to talk about, big conversations to have, and a lot happening over the course of the next few months. We're in the middle of this sort of cost of living crisis, or the start of being able to see just how bad things are going to get. We're going to get a new Prime Minister this week. I think it's going to be Liz Truss. If you're listening in the future and it isn't, then that's quite a surprise. Also, we're just speaking ahead of World Suicide Prevention Day, so we'll be touching on that as part of next week's podcast. But there's plenty to talk about in the meantime, because September means back to school. And a focus this week on young people. Young people heading back to school this week. We've had GCSE results, A-level results, people heading into university, of course, for the first time. And a new survey from the team at STEM4 has really shone a light on some of the issues that young people are facing at the moment. Now, STEM4 got a big shout in the middle of August from Tom Holland, the actor, who decided to take a break from social media. Now, Tom is the guy who plays Spiderman in the Marvel movies, and he basically said, I need a little bit of time because social media is detrimental and forces him sometimes to spiral. So he said he's switching it off. But he flagged up the work of STEM4 as a great website full of resources that young people can sort of tune into. So absolutely worth catching up with Dr Nihara Krause, who's been with us on the programme before, and she's with us again today. Now, this survey's found nearly half of young people say they're currently experiencing mental health difficulties, of which 3 in 10 don't have the courage to ask for help, or say they don't have the courage to ask for help, compounded by feelings of loneliness in 44% of young people, feeling left out and isolated either all or most of the time for 1 in 3. It says here that 44% of young people say they are struggling to make and maintain friendships. Now, ahead of Youth World Mental Health Day, or Youth Mental Health Day, which is coming up in mid-September, there's a big focus on connecting, and connecting meaningfully, which is a big part of our lives as well as young people's lives. Not just about tagging someone on Facebook or liking someone's post, physically sitting down with them, talking to them, walking with them, grabbing a coffee with them, whatever that means to make a meaningful connection with someone, instead of this sort of like fly-by night, oh, I saw them on social media, I saw their holiday photos, but I didn't click on them, or I didn't mention it to them when I saw them. Meaningful connection. It's a big topic, and there's lots to get into. So Dr. Nihara Krause, once again, is our guest on Mental Health Monday. These are brand new stats out from the team at STEM4. The website for there, stem4.org.uk. That's STEM, then the number 4.org.uk. And I started out by touching on Tom's recommendation and what it was like, and what maybe a surprise it was to see that Spiderman is a big fan.
We were so thrilled because it was completely unexpected. And we were so thrilled to have Tom Holland announce a very important message, actually, giving young people permission to take a break from social media. But also to mention our apps and the work that we do. And it's been the most incredible benefit to the charity with regards getting our message through. So we're enormously grateful.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where, as professionals, you guys will talk about mental health and you try and make those connections within communities and try and, make sure that the right people are coming towards you. And I guess if, someone like Tom Holland, who's one of the most sort of iconic actors for his young generation, playing Spider-Man in all those movies, for him to go, if you want to talk about your mental health, check out these guys, is really something, isn't it?
It really is. And also specifically for young men, because I think it's mental health has always had stigma associated with it. It's luckily getting better, but it's still really difficult for boys and men to talk about their mental health and to ask for help and actually to take some proactive steps. So again, thank you, Tom, and that was amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. In terms of taking a break from mental health, from social media for sort of mental health reasons, you guys at STEM4 have put together a survey, the findings of which are sort of concerning. One stat in particular that stands out, and I wanted to sort of get your take on it, Dr. Nihara. 32% of those surveyed said they were unable to reduce the amount of time they spend online, even if it meant better physical and mental health. So you've got young people maybe listening to Tom Holland saying, I'm switching off. It's good for me. It makes me feel better. It gets me out and about more. 1 in 3 are saying, I can't. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. What's happening there, do you think, in those young people's lives?
Yeah, so I think that what our survey, which was a survey when we talk about that percentage, it's of 2,000 young people nationally. So it's a large number. And I think what young people are saying to us is that it is their main form of connecting. So around 1/3 of our sample said that they connected online more than they connected face to face. And many quoted the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic as contributing to that. So loneliness was high, a kind of lack of social confidence about how to make face-to-face connections. Many young people told us that they would worry about picking up a phone and connecting with someone, partly because they didn't want to bother them. And I think that there's partly a cultural shift in terms of how people connect. So perhaps if we talk to our parents' generation, they'd say, well, no, I was on the phone all the time. And even now they might pick up a phone instead of sending a direct message to someone, but that's not a young person's experience. So I think there's a combination of factors that make young people relate to social media. And of course, that really important thing about not wanting to miss out. So purely by being young, by wanting to be part of your generation and your group and find out what's happening, you don't want to miss out. So even if you know that what you're reading isn't helpful for you, it's counterbalanced by, but if my mates are going to all meet up and I'm not going to be there, or if they're talking about something and I don't find out about that, then that overrides it's making me feel awful.
That's that thing, isn't it, then, around a healthy relationship between yourself and a mobile phone? Because as you mentioned, culturally or generationally, young people go, well, of course we speak more on the phone because I just tap, tap, tap from wherever I am and I speak to my friends. That's absolutely normal. But it's when it becomes problematic, or when it's framed within that thing of, even if, I think that's one of the definitions of addiction, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Doing something that is not good for you, but you can't stop doing it. And that kind of sounds what we're talking about here, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So there's almost a compulsion to have to do it. And you can notice the negatives, but somehow you're still outweighing that and continuing to do it. So yes, you're right. And I think the term addiction has been used tentatively and carefully, but certainly I think we have what are called behavioral addictions, which mean that these are behaviors that become almost ones that are very, very difficult to break, bringing about the same types of withdrawal that you might experience if you come off a chemical addiction.
In terms of sort of your experience of speaking to young people over generations, I guess, other things that young people will do, let's say it's, playing video games, on a TV. At some point, somebody else wants to watch the TV and you've got to switch it off. If it's football, at some point, you've got to leave the football field because you're tired and you want to go home. Is there something around mobile phone use that this sort of, it's actually in our pockets or it's in our hands all the time, that actually makes it a little bit different? Because it's everywhere at all times. You could even be on a mobile phone in the shower now because they're all sort of water resistant and water protected in a way you would have to in the past form natural breaks to habits, behavioral addictions, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. So I think there's something about how well we can impose limits on ourselves. So there's a whole psychological concept called self-regulation, and self-regulation is a little easier for some people than for others. And certain types of condition make self-regulation. So if you're really impulsive, for example, if you've got attention deficit disorder, then self-regulation is incredibly difficult. But also part of being a young person is that you want to push boundaries. You don't want to stop at a sensible time, whatever that sensible time might be. So that difficulty in self-regulation coupled with easy 24/7 access to a device can sometimes not be a very good thing. So you're right. Yeah.
What are the consequences of 1 in 3 of those surveyed being unable to reduce the amount of time on their mobile phone? What issues might they face as a result of this inability to put the phone down and walk away?
Yes. Well, Tom very interestingly used a term when he described why he was stepping back. And he said, social media sometimes makes me spiral. Now, spiral is a very useful term to think about it, because if you think about spirals, spirals can either move downwards or upwards. And if you use that analogy in terms of the effect of something on our mental health, then one of the things that interacting with too much social media that can happen is it can make our mood spiral downwards. And what might happen is there might be something distressing that you read online. It might be that you're comparing and you're finding that what you're comparing doesn't make you feel good about yourself. And then your mood starts to dip down. You might start to feel anxious. And often what people do then is they go back and they try and search for something to either confirm what they're reading is true, or indeed to try and disprove of it. And if you find something that disproves of it, that might help, but generally it doesn't. And so the spiral not just goes downwards, but it's circular. So the behavior leads to more of the behavior. And the impact of that on some people is it can, apart from making you feel not great about yourself, is it can longer term affect your self-confidence and your self-esteem. It can affect your body image if that's what you're comparing things against, and that can lead to eating and other food-related issues. It can affect mood. So some people will say that they actually feel very low in mood. And then an escape for mood, the circular thing I mentioned, might be to go back there. And then you have more of an addiction almost to needing something to distract you and support you. And generally people talk about very high levels of anxiety post the impact of too much social media.
And I guess in terms of, trends that young people are involved in, we can't really class, I guess, mobile phone use as a trend now. It's almost like it's an inbuilt sort of skill, if we can call it a skill, if that's the right word for it, that all young people are sort of born and grow up with, even though, my generation is still sort of trying to work out how various different apps work and all that kind of thing. But it's so inbuilt, isn't it, to young people? So how do people like yourself get your head around that this is something which you can't say, well, don't worry, because in a few years' time people will move on from mobile phones and there'll be something else, because quite clearly the technology is, if anything, getting closer to us. It's becoming more attached to us in terms of even, your bus pass is now on your phone, so you've got to have it with you. Your passport and the way you travel and your tickets are all on your phone, so you can't even go on holiday without them because your plane ticket is on the phone in front of you. So how do we cope with that?
I think what we have to do is to really start to think about two things. The first is what might make an individual a little bit more vulnerable to not using a mobile phone, or actually it's a computer, it's a mini computer in our pocket, really. What makes them more vulnerable to misusing that device? And the second is about educating everyone, young people, adults, on when the benefits of that use is being outweighed by the negatives of that. So there are two things that I think we have to be able to, we can't say, let's get rid of it. As you say, it's kind of part of our essential day to day. We store things on it, we learn things from it. Some people will use mobile devices in schools as part of their education, and young people do. They learn enormously beneficial things by being on there. It's a way to connect with your friends. It's a virtual assistant. So there are good things from it. But what I would say, firstly, in terms of vulnerability, is if you are someone, as I mentioned before, who has got difficulty in managing impulsiveness, if you find it quite difficult to set limits on your behavior, if your self-esteem and self-confidence is low, then that makes you more vulnerable to some of the effects that you can get back. If you find it difficult to be assertive, if somebody is perhaps potentially bullying you or writing negative things online, then you need to learn how to manage that in some way, or you need to be assertive and say, I'm going to block you, or I'm going to say no to that request. Then those will make you a little bit more vulnerable to misuse of a device or social media in that way. And then in terms of managing social media effectively, first of all, I think start to notice if it's having a negative effect on you. So, for example, are you a bit more grumpy? Are you finding that your heart is racing a little bit more when you're reading it? Are you finding it hard to stop thinking about something that you saw online? Are you distracted at the point that you're neglecting other things that you're doing? Social media or online use is a huge waster of time. And you might start off with one thing, and that search function means that you might go, no, let me just watch something else, and then let me watch something else. So is that happening to you? Notice, and then start to take steps about what you might do. Think about the triggers to that. Is it certain types of times? Is it certain types of material? And move away and do something else. And I think connected with Youth Mental Health Day, our theme is connecting meaningfully. And I think meaningful connections are primarily face-to-face connections. So think a little bit about the balance between your online use and your real face-to-face connections, and try and think about incorporating more face-to-face connections and see how you go. And there's lots of other tips that you can learn. You can get them off the STEM4 social media and other websites, but there's lots of other things you can do to protect yourself from being impacted negatively.
Just earlier, you mentioned that fear of missing out. I just wondered from when we connect meaningfully,
yes,
often that's to do with receiving information which is useful and relevant to you, and then responding to that information. It strikes me now that the fear of missing out is the fear of missing everything. Like, you've got to constantly be on top of every single conversation, chat, group chat, piece of news, football transfer, all of this stuff, which in the past we would kind of go, well, it might be when you saw friends on a Friday night, you would hear about their time and their day and a bit of gossip maybe. You might have a family meal on a Sunday, so you would get an update from them. You might buy a newspaper in the morning and get some information there. You might watch the news at 10 and get your nightly information. That might have been a traditional way of receiving information, and it almost gives you enough time to sort of compartmentalize and compute it. Whereas now, the bombarding of information is so intense, but at the same time, I get a sense that so much of it is not really valuable information, but you almost have to accept a lot of non-valuable information just so that when that one piece comes,
yes,
you can kind of grab it and go, oh, I'm glad that I listened to all that other nonsense so I could get this piece of information. That's a really difficult thing for young people, presumably, to get their head around.
It really is. And I think it's something, isn't it, about can you be selective when you're offered a huge menu of information, as you say, you're not making a choice. Whereas if you were going to buy a newspaper or if you were going to tune into a certain program, you are firstly choosing to receive information at a particular time. And you can also choose what information you tune into. So I think that's very difficult. It's difficult to filter in what's there. And also, I think there is a worry about losing out on the things that you might read. So what if you just miss something? So therefore, perhaps you have to look at everything.
Absolutely.
So scrolling,
Absolutely.
scrolling down is easy, isn't it? And I think that's my other bit of advice, is that sometimes we're not mindful of routine, habitual things we do. We don't notice it. We don't notice what it's like when we brush our teeth, for example. So, and social media is the same thing. We don't notice when we pick up our phone and we scroll. So try and be more mindful when you are doing that, and really start to notice. Take a moment out to go, what's this like? Why am I doing it? Do I want to change this habit? So that again gives you control over what you will experience.
I found in the past, and I've tried to step away from some of the websites that are sort of designed to make you do it, because originally it was called doom scrolling, I think, which was constantly looking for sort of bad news. But I think I found it was more, and you've hinted at it there, it was almost zombie scrolling, where you'd almost be looking around the room, but your thumb would still be doing this action of, oh, I'm waiting for this next thing that might be interesting. And actually, to be able to catch yourself and go, what am I doing here? There's no value in this. Put it down and walk away and do something else is a skill set, which I think, we all need to learn, adults as well as young people, because of course the young people who've grown up with it now will take this on to adulthood. Let's move on, Dr. Nihara, with the some of the other survey findings, because there's so much in this, by the way. Of those 2,000 young people who were surveyed as part of the work from STEM4, 46% currently experiencing mental health difficulties, so almost half. Part of me is deeply concerned about that as a figure. Part of me is pleased that more than half of those people had the knowledge to recognize that on a survey they could tick a box that could recognize that they had a mental health difficulty. 3 in 10 of those who had the difficulties hadn't asked for help, which of course is a concern as well. So as we head back to school, cohorts of millions of young people, this survey shows that a significant number in each and every class and group and friendship group will have mental health difficulties, and a significant number of them won't be asking for help, or can't ask for help, or don't know how to ask for help. And that's something that schools need to be aware of, as well as parents need to be aware, knowing that their children might fit into any one of these categories.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we all need to, at different levels, be aware of it. So first of all, I think children and young people need to start to kind of reflect on finding some words that they can kind of then say, even if it's, I'm not feeling very comfortable, I'm feeling a bit on edge, whatever it might be. And some of those feelings will be completely and totally natural to feel at that time. We'll all feel anxious about going back to school after having had a break. We'll all feel anxious about not knowing who our new class teacher or, what the kind of next university course might be. So it's about being able to find the words to say it and to have some sort of discussion without feeling that you will be put down. Parents, I think, parents and carers need to be aware that young people might find it difficult sometimes either to recognize that they're not feeling right, or that they don't have the words to do that. And most often young people show their distress through their behaviors. So for parents, if you can notice whether their behaviors are different to the ones that you would normally, are they a bit more withdrawn, are they a bit more agitated, are they having more fights, have they kind of stopped seeing their friends, so those would be some of the warning signs for parents to then start to have a conversation, not too heavy. And driving in the car is probably one of the best places to have that conversation, is to kind of just go, I've just noticed that maybe you're a bit quieter than usual, or that perhaps things are not right. Just wondered, how things might be, or even to perhaps talk about their own experiences. When I had to go to school after a break, I used to have that horrible feeling of, whatever it was in my stomach. So just to start to have that conversation, and then be aware that 1 in 6 young people post the pandemic are presenting with some sort of mental ill health issue, primarily anxiety or depression. But with that in mind, I think parents also need to start to recognize that something might not be right, and to be able to continue to have those conversations in order to then perhaps request help on behalf of their young people. And teachers, educators are doing a huge amount of training in terms of being able to identify young people who might be in distress. And of course, we're still post-pandemic. So the sort of loss of learning, the loss of socializing skills, and the sort of difficulty in kind of attendance, that there's a lot about school attendance at the moment post-pandemic. So teachers are having to kind of pick up on all sorts of signs that are different to how it was before, and then really again think about how they might support a young person in that educational establishment. Because one of the things we know is if your mental health is in a good place, then your learning will be enhanced considerably. So the two go hand in hand.
And in terms of a time frame, there might be parents sort of almost listening, this week and going, well, if they're apprehensive because it's a new school, or it's a new timetable, or it's new teachers.
Yeah.
Is there a point at which, maybe over a period of weeks, or if there's still issues and apprehensions after a couple of months, is that when maybe a parent might need to take some extra steps beyond that sort of, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Oh, I don't really know. Oh, I've not settled into a routine yet, but I might be okay in the future.
No, you're right. So I think the thing is about trying to separate out transition or a natural response to something. So if somebody's had a loss, or if they're kind of going through, if it's a completely new school and they have no friends, then you need to give them some time to settle into that new school. And what would dictate someone who's perhaps starting to have a negative impact on their mental health would be the length of time. And that would vary from person to person. But usually, if you've had about a month or so of struggling to settle in, and you've got high levels of distress, then I would absolutely start to sort of take note of that. But also it would be in terms of how it's impacting on that young person. So is their sleep enormously disrupted? Has it affected their appetite? Are they very, very kind of apathetic and withdrawn? So to start to notice perhaps the effect it might be having on them, on their emotional well-being and on their performance, and then take an informed choice in terms of having that discussion with them. And there's absolutely no harm in saying, let's just go and have a chat with our GP, just let's find out. And if the GP says, no, I think that's okay, we'll just keep an eye, well, that's great. If the GP says you're absolutely right to have raised this concern, let's sort of work together on looking at next steps, then that's also good. So I would just listen.
Absolutely. Dr. Nihara, sometimes when people talk about young people growing up, they talk about children, they have it easy, it's an easy life. It strikes me now, when you look at the sort of complex things that young people are dealing with in a world which is actually a different world to the world in which many adults grew up in. It must. I don't know if you're surprised by it now, the issues that young people face, which maybe they did face some of these issues before, but they were so not talked about. It was so hidden. Eating disorders, for instance, have been with us for a very long time, and the conversation has opened up a little bit, but I'm aware of how often they flag as, for instance, an issue for young people now. There's a perception that young people have it easy, and then it's an easy life. And just listening to some of the things that you've talked about, the issues that come up in the surveys, just goes to show we need to be mindful, don't we, that even though we might look back at those times very fondly, the day-to-day of being a young person is really tricky.
It is tricky. I think the thing is that there have been issues generationally. So people have experienced poor mental health, throughout history, really. But I think it's something to do with the number of challenges that have to be faced, the increased stress, not just in young people themselves, but in their families, because families are under huge stress. And we've now got, additional socioeconomic stress. We know, for example, that mental ill health is impacted by economic status and poverty. So it's also affected by physical health and illness. So there are more challenges at the moment that will impact on a young person's mental health. What I also do want to say, however, is that we mustn't mix up mental distress from mental ill health. That mental distress it's extremely painful to have and definitely needs support, but it is not an ill health condition. And I think we also need to start to separate out and go, yes, I know you're distressed. It's not a matter of just gritting your teeth and getting on with it, but let's all work together in a sort of non-clinical way to try and look at how we might resolve this. But if there is a mental ill health issue, then here are you need some extra help. And then this is where it would be good to get some professional help and assessment and understanding and support.
Absolutely. Some great advice around that on stem4.org.uk. That's stem4, the number 4.org.uk. Finally, Dr. Nihara, we're headed into this sort of winter period now. The cost of living crisis is upon us. When we have these sort of big incidents, the mental health impact can be felt a little bit further down the line. What are you sort of anticipating around, maybe young people, adults, many people, maybe this summer with this sort of choice of heating or eating, or young people going into school where, they've not been able to have a hot bath or a hot shower because it's just not possible at home? What are your concerns, or maybe almost warnings about what could come if there's not a real robust response now from those in power?
Well, I think that basic self-care is a basic human need. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, feeling safe, feeling adequate, provided for in terms of food, nutrition, comfort is a basic need. And if that basic need isn't met, then it will have a very big effect on both physical and mental health needs. So increased levels of anxiety, but very specifically depression. So depression is now the world's leading mental ill health condition. We need to think about how we might promote some sort of sense of positivity or hopefulness about the future. So how do we survive now? But very much, what do we need to be resilient to be able to deal with the future? So we really need to focus on that. And we also need to focus actually on really thinking about our health system and making the health system and the social care system as robust as possible, because people within those systems are also struggling. So we'll have a higher rate of individuals impacted, but also the systems that support us are also impacted. So we need resourcing, we need training, we need a really good look at what framework will really help support and benefit all of us and our well-being for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the case, whether we were having this cost of living crisis or not, absolutely so important. Dr. Nihara, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Nihara Krause, consultant clinical psychologist at STEM4, as recommended by Spiderman himself. So you've got to get that absolutely mentioned in there. Stem4.org.uk is the website. Dr. Nihara, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we will speak again very soon.
Thank you very much indeed.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.